I mean, frankly, you might disagree with this. I don't know if those two ideas are ever really separable, like realistically separable. Like, I think there will always be laws put in place because of a religion, or the other way around, right? Like we talk about like separation of church and state. I don't think that's actually a thing. I don't believe that.
You don't think so?
Well, I don't think it actually ever happens in practice. No.
Yeah, so it's the one unique thing that the United States did, right? Is a secular government. It's not democracy, not separation of powers, not states or federalism. The power is derived from the people and not a god. That's the one unique thing that the United States did. I think it's possible, and I think a lot of the thinkers, when they wrote that down, were really looking at the Enlightenment and seeing if there was a way to turn away from that and have a separation of church and state where we'd have august and well-reasoned philosophers come to the table and find the best solution. But to your point, we have seen that religious folks are kind of opposed to that.
Yeah.
They're opposed
100%.
to that philosophical discussion because if they have the answer, right? They already have the answer. They don't need to think about it. So that, I think, is where the problem is. It's not that separation of church and state can't be there. It's that religion, theism in particular, is inherently opposed to that. Because if we really have a separation of church and state, I don't think religion can survive. Why would somebody appeal to a religious text when they want to go get their driver's license? It makes no sense. But that's what religious folks need to do to keep it front and center so that it is centered in there. And that's why I oppose Christian nationalism and want that wall of separation of church and state there. Because if tomorrow we just elected a whole new slate and they're all Democrats, Republicans, whatever, but they're all atheists and they don't care about religion, you would see an improvement in the laws because you would just have the nonsense, the culture war stuff just gone. They would just tell the churches, shut up. We're going to figure out how to fix renewable energy. We're going to figure out how to make sure all the women have health care. We don't care about what your book says. You do that at home. That's cool. Don't let your daughter do that. Fine. But that's not the world we live in. But I think it's possible.
Sure. I guess the one point I wanted to object to is if you look at the Soviet Union, I think a lot of time, and it's actually interesting, Christians will argue that socialism had no religion. That's why we need religion. Although actually in World War II, the Soviet Union did embrace Christianity for a brief amount of time to invigorate people to help fight their cause. Right. I do think sometimes when law goes to its fullest extent, when you have something that is akin to a socialist society where it's this is the rule of law, no ifs, ands, or buts. If we catch you with bread, we're going to rob your bread and all that. I think in the absence of that, people naturally tend to find religion because when they have nothing, then they create something for an emotional sense. You know what I mean?
And that seems to me seems natural and normal. I appreciate that, right? You don't know where the thunder comes from, so you're going to create a story on where the thunder comes from.
Yeah, exactly.
I get that. I think Alex O'Connor had a really good response to that point where somebody brings up the Soviet Union and what an atheist government looks like. I think he's correct in that it was an atheist government, but it wasn't secular because they were anti, not just God, but they were anti-competing power structures. And guess what's the biggest competing power structure to a secular government? Churches. And so Stalin and all them, they didn't hate God so much because they thought it was silly and nonsense in the books, although they probably did. It was because they were competing power structures where if the church had to do something, they didn't have control over the population. So they had to get rid of the church to scare, put the fear of God into them, except God isn't them, it's the state. So I think it's an atheist state, but it wasn't secular because the state religion was basically Stalinism.
Interesting.
And I think that's very different when you put it up against a constitution where you bounce all your laws off of that and say that's your stop. If it violates these things like the freedom of speech, well then if you follow the First Amendment, Stalinism is impossible. If you follow the First Amendment, right? That's the trouble.
Well, and I think that's the ruffle of it, right?